Hey, Storystream fam. If you followed our past mysteries like Whispers in Room 10 or The Weight of Innocence, thank you for sticking with us. Your theories, your support, and your deep dives have meant everything. Today, we're setting sail on something darker, lonelier, and far more unsettling. Welcome to our brand new story, The Wake of Ash. It starts with a sentence, 1 year alone at sea. No contact, no anchoring, just a man, a boat, and whatever's waiting beyond the horizon. But the ocean has its own memory, and it never forgets. If you're new here, you picked the perfect time to climb aboard. This story unfolds slow and strange, and it only gets deeper. Like, subscribe and hit that bell, because what's coming next will drag you under. The Wake of Ash. Part 1, The Sentence. They sent me off at dawn. No ceremony, no last words. Just a nod from the harbor master, and the sound of boots on wet dock planks, retreating like the last notes of a funeral march. The fog rolled in off the harbor like a second sentence. It wrapped around the boat, swallowing the shoreline before I could decide if I wanted one last look. I didn't. I already knew what I'd see. A few crooked buildings hunched against the sea wind, people pretending not to watch from shuttered windows, and the low, craggy silhouette of Tribunal Hall, behind it all, blacker than the morning sky. I cast off in silence. The old cutter they gave me wasn't much to look at. The Mercy, its name etched in cracked blue paint on the hull. There was no irony in the naming. They didn't do irony in Goransport, just punishment. 1 year at sea, alone, no contact, no anchoring except for provisions. Atonement through solitude. They called it the drift. Some did it for crimes. Some volunteered as some twisted rite of cleansing. I hadn't volunteered. The engine coughed and growled awake, like a beast stirred from hibernation. It would keep me moving, whether I wanted to or not. That was the rule, always moving. Drifting aimlessly would get you another year. They didn't want you to wallow. They wanted you to reckon. By the time I reached open water, the land had vanished behind me. It was like it had never been there at all. Just the hiss of wind and the crackle of waves under the hull. No other vessels in sight. I was well and truly alone. I stood at the helm for a long while, letting the cold bite through my jacket, trying to feel something like freedom, but it didn't come. All I could feel was the silence. Not peaceful, but bloated, heavy, like the sea itself was holding its breath. I didn't cry. That part of me was already buried. Instead, I busied myself. Inventory first. 1 month's supply of food and water, manual filtration gear, a shortwave radio, received only, of course, maps of the central sea routes in a journal, leather-bound and sealed shut with wax. I wasn't supposed to open it until the 7th day. Let your guilt find its voice, the sentencing officer had said. I found a knife tucked into a drawer below deck. Someone had scratched a message into the blade with something sharp. Don't cut corners. Just cut clean. Probably a joke. Sailors had a sick sense of humor. After a time, I made coffee and stood on deck, watching the sun rise properly, red and bruised, like the sky had been in a fight overnight. Maybe it had. Maybe it always is. And we just don't notice until we're out here, where the world is too big to ignore. That's when the ache started. The deep kind. Not hunger. Not fatigue. The other kind. The kind that starts in your stomach and climbs into your throat, curling there like a bitter smoke. It has a name, but I don't use it. It's not guilt. Not yet. Not for me. I've been told it takes about a week to start hallucinating if you're not careful. The quiet gets the people, makes them hear voices, or see lights on the horizon that aren't there. Sometimes the ocean whispers. Sometimes it sings. I wasn't afraid of any of that. What I was afraid of was remembering. There were gaps in my memory, deliberate absences, places I hadn't dared go in my mind for years. Names, a face, the salt in my nose when I pulled him up too late, the silence after the splash. The worst kind of silence, the permanent kind. I tried not to think of him, not on the first day, but the mind doesn't care about plans. It creeps where it wants. And out here, there's nowhere else for it to go but inward. The sun climbed higher. By mid-morning, I cut the engine and let the current take me for a while. The boat creaked like it was alive, joints popping in protest. I walked the deck, counting my steps, measuring time by movement. I found a gull perched on a rail. It stared at me. I stared back. For a moment, I wondered if it had come to deliver a message, like in the old sea tales. But it just tilted its head, dropped a white mess on the deck, and flew off into the wind. I watched it until it vanished. You'd be surprised how many ways a day can stretch when there's no one to share it with. By evening, I cleaned the deck, polished the engine housing, and reorganized the canned goods by expiration date. Anything to keep my hands busy. When night fell, I didn't light the lamp. Just sat in the dark and listened. The sea is different at night. It has teeth. You hear the difference. Like something just beneath the surface is gnawing at the hull, testing it. Like something knows you're alone. That first night, I dreamed of the tribunal. Only, it wasn't the harbor behind them. It was the open sea, and they were all drowning. Every one of them, smiling. By the second day, I began performing rituals I didn't believe in. It started small, boiling water, even when I didn't need to, folding the bedding into a perfect square, scratching a tally into the mast with a pointed knife I'd found. I told myself it was about routine, about keeping the mind in shape. But even then, I think I knew it was something else. Fear wears many coats. The wind was stronger that morning, snapping the sail like an argument I couldn't win. The sea had a new color, steel gray with a bruised underbelly, like it resented my presence. I tried to read the waves like I used to, back when I crewed for Captain Darrell on the Brine-Wake. I could almost hear him now, barking orders with salt on his lips, boots thudding across the deck. Almost. I hadn't spoken out loud since leaving port. I didn't want to hear the sound of my own voice. It felt too real, too permanent. I'd spoken enough already before the sentencing. In the weeks leading up, I'd argued, protested, denied, and when that didn't work, I did what they wanted. I stopped resisting. They said I accepted the punishment with dignity. Truth was, I was just too tired to fight anymore. I opened the wax-sealed journal just after dawn. The seal cracked like old bone. Inside, blank pages, each bordered with a simple ink frame. At the top of each one, a prompt, date, coordinates, reflection, like they expected the sea to shape me into something worth remembering. I filled out the first line half-heartedly. No coordinates. I hadn't checked yet. Instead, I wrote, still afloat. No voices yet. Salt on everything. That was enough for now. Midday brought light rain, and the kind of wind that slides down your collar like a warning. I spent the hours repairing a tear in the sail I hadn't noticed the day before. The thread felt slick with humidity, and my fingers ached with the cold. Still, the repetition helped. So pull knot, stitch by stitch, like I was sewing myself back together. I thought of my mother's hands, the way they'd braid rope for hours in the boathouse behind our old cottage. Her fingers worked faster than her eyes. She'd hum to herself, always off-key. When I asked why she didn't sing the right tune, she just said, because the right tune is always someone else's song. I didn't hum. By early afternoon, the fog returned. It crept across the surface of the water in low sheets, curling and uncurling like breath. Visibility dropped to nothing. I could hear the sea, but I couldn't see it, like I was sailing to the lungs of some sleeping beast. I cut the engine again, let the silence settle in. Fog does strange things of mind, bends sound and space. Everything becomes close, pressed in. That's when I saw the first handprint. It was faint, salt-crusted, on the outside of the cabin window. At first, I thought it was mine, maybe from the morning when I checked the rigging, but the angle was wrong. It was high, almost above the frame, as if someone taller than me had reached down and pressed it there. I stood staring at it for a full minute before I moved. When I did, it wasn't toward the window. It was below deck. Rationally, I told myself it was condensation. Salt mist combined with heat from the cabin, a trick of the wind and my own nerves. But deep down, the part of me that still dreamed in screams and drowning, I knew better. I stayed below deck for most of the afternoon, reorganizing everything I'd already organized. I cleaned tools that didn't need cleaning. I rewound rope. I alphabetized canned goods by brand. By dusk, I dared go above again. The handprint was gone. No rain had fallen. No waves had washed the deck. Nothing to explain it. I stood for a while in the dimming light, trying to find something solid to hold on to. A piece of logic, an anchor thought. I failed. That night, I lit the oil lamp for the first time. Its glow turned the cabin into a womb. Too warm, too soft, like the inside of secret. The shadows on the walls danced with a kind of life I tried not to name. I forced myself to eat. Canned beans and stale crackers. I chewed slowly, mechanically, like a machine with one job. The taste barely registered. Afterward, I returned to the journal. This time I wrote more. I think I saw something today. Or maybe nothing. Hard to know the difference out here. Fog is thick as sleep. Something touched the ship. I didn't. I paused, then added a final line. Maybe I'm already not alone. Sleep came like a thief, unannounced and sudden. I don't remember lying down. Only that when I opened my eyes, it was morning again, and the second handprint was on a mirror above the wash basin, inside the cabin. I stared at the mirror for a long time. There was another handprint, smaller than the one on the cabin window, but still too large to be mine. Damp, smeared slightly at the fingertips, like whoever left it had trailed their hand across the glass. The mirror itself was framed in rusted brass, bolted to the cabin wall like some afterthought from a previous owner. I cleaned it just the day before. I was sure of that. The air inside the cabin was still, with no condensation, no mist, no plausible explanation. I reached out and touched the mirror's surface. Cold, dry, the print didn't smudge. It was as though it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. I didn't panic. Not then. Panic takes energy, and I was already running on fumes. Physically, mentally, what I felt was something colder, more measured. The same thing I'd felt that night in the storm, before the sentencing, before the tribunal. When I knew someone was about to die, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. A kind of numb dread. I forced myself to get up, to check the cabin lock. Still bolted from the inside. I hadn't heard any disturbances during the night. The hatch above hadn't been opened. The hinges were stiff, still sealed with salt and rust. No one had entered, except someone had. That was the paradox eating away at me, corroding the edges of my reason. I scribbled in the journal, hands shaking slightly, not imagining it. There is something else here. Not waves, not wind, something that watches, or remembers. After that, I took to checking the boat from bow to stern every hour. A full sweep. Inventory, rigging, storage. I even lifted the floor grates, peered into the engine compartment. Nothing but tools, cables, coils of rope, and the persistent, maddening smell of old diesel and mildew. I considered throwing the mirror overboard, but something about that felt disrespectful, like it was a warning, and ignoring it would only make things worse. So I cleaned the print off, slowly, methodically, and left the mirror uncovered. That afternoon, the sea grew strange again. Not rough, exactly, but irregular. The waves didn't follow the wind. They moved in opposing directions, tiny collisions that made the hull groan like it was under pressure from all sides. The compass needle twitched slightly, then froze. I turned the engine off again and let the cutter drift. When I looked over the rail, I saw it, a slick in the water, just a few meters off the starboard side. Oil, maybe, or algae, but it shimmered unnaturally, a dark film that seemed to stretch too far, too still for such gentle weather. No fish, no birds, no sound but my own breathing. I leaned forward. That's when I heard it. The sound. It wasn't a voice. Not at first. More like a breath. A long exhale from just beneath the surface. Then the faintest whisper, garbled, underwater, like someone trying to speak through a glass jar. I staggered back, slipped, and hit the deck hard. The whisper stopped. I crawled to the hatch and scrambled below. I didn't write anything in the journal that time. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the corner of the cabin, back against the bulkhead, knife in hand. I don't know how long I stayed that way. Long enough for the lamp oil to burn low. Long enough for the darkness to press in again. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, isolation, sensory deprivation. But the whisper had known my name. That night, I dreamed of the sea not as it is, but as something alive. Not metaphorically alive. Conscious, pulsing with thought. In the dream, the boat wasn't floating. It was being carried, like prey in the jaws of something massive and ancient. There were voices in the waves, crying out from beneath. Familiar voices. One of them was mine. I woke up gasping. The air was thick, sour. I turned the lamp up and scanned the room. No new prints. No sign of intrusion. Just the same creaking hull and the low thud of waves. But there was something else. Something worse. The journal had been moved. It lay open on the desk, even though I hadn't touched it since morning. And on the page, beneath my last entry, was a line I hadn't written. You're not drifting. You're being steered. The ink was dry. The handwriting wasn't mine. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat at the tiny desk, oil lamp flickering, eyes fixed on the page with foreign handwriting stare back at me. You're not drifting. You're being steered. I touched the letters, traced the curves of the ink. It wasn't smudged. Whoever or whatever, Roy had done so carefully, deliberately, like they wanted me to see it, not just stumble across it. And that somehow was worse. At some point, my thoughts turned hard and skeptical. I tore the page from the journal, crumpled it, tossed it in the small iron stove, and lit a match. The flame swallowed the words without a sound. I wanted it gone. I wanted to believe I was hallucinating, that isolation was just eating my brain slowly, cell by cell. But the truth sat with me in the flickering light like a second shadow. I wasn't alone. Morning arrived like a slow bleeding wound on the horizon. The sun didn't rise so much as crawl up, unwilling and gray. The sea had stilled, eerily so. No birds, no wind, no current. Just a vast, breathing silence. I went through the motions of breakfast. Boiled water, opened a tin of sardines, chewed without tasting. Ritual again. Even if I didn't believe in the gods of the sea, I believed in doing something. I pulled out the nautical chart they'd left me, a map of the southern reach, where I was told to remain for the duration of my sentence. I hadn't checked my position in days. I just drifted and sailed west vaguely, assuming I'd stay within boundaries. But as I triangulated my location, using the sextant and rough estimates, my breath caught in my throat. I wasn't in the southern reach. I was at least 50 nautical miles northwest of it, deep in open water. No shipping lanes, no land masses within sight or signal range. I double-checked, triple-checked. Same result. There was no way I could have drifted that far without noticing, unless something had guided me here, or someone. I rushed above deck, scanning the horizon with the binoculars. Nothing, just the haze of heat and salt and endless gray water. But my eyes kept being drawn to the stern, where the small auxiliary rudder sat locked in place. I hadn't touched it since leaving port, but it was loose. The locking mechanism was unlatched, subtle, but enough to let the rudder move with the current, or worse, with outside influence. I bent down to examine it, heart thudding, no rust flakes disturbed, no signs of a break or forced entry. Just unlocked, like someone had come up in the night and undone it. I secured it again, this time using a metal pin I bent myself, threading it through the latch to make sure no amount of rocking or vibration would shake it loose. Then I checked below deck, again. Storage bins, engine housing, even the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Nothing, but it felt like something had passed through, the way dust had settled unevenly. The smell of seawater stronger in places it had no business being. And I kept hearing it. That sound, that voice, faint, like someone humming just beneath the edge of hearing. Not tuneful, not even human, but rhythmic, persistent, and always louder when I was near the journal. So I stopped writing in it. Instead, I began keeping notes on scraps of cloth I tore from an old rag I used to clean the bilge. I hid them in a sealed tin beneath the cot. If there was something using the journal, communicating through it, I wasn't going to play along. By noon, the sea began to shift again. Not in movement, still calm, but in color. It turned green, not the green of algae or shallow water. This was a vibrant, almost luminous emerald. Too bright, too unnatural. The surface shimmered like oil on glass. I dipped a bucket overboard and brought up a sample. It smelled metallic, faintly bitter. When I ran it through the small desalination filter, the residue it left behind was thick and dark, like ink. I didn't drink it. Instead, I marked the location and decided to turn the ship around, back toward the reach, back toward the route they'd ordered me to follow. Punishment or not, I had to regain control of this voyage. That's when I noticed a sail. A tier had formed, another one, this time high on the main sheet, in a spot I just reinforced days earlier. The stitching had come undone in a neat, surgical line, like it had been sliced with a blade. I checked the ropes. The knots had been retied in different patterns. Ones I didn't recognize. Not sailor's knots. Not practical. Almost decorative. Symbols. I spent the rest of the day working, not thinking. Sail repair, not checks, recalibrating the compass. I turned the boat southeast, as much as a light wind would allow. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept the lamp burning and my knife within reach. Around midnight, I heard something scrape against the hull. Not a wave, not debris. It was steady, deliberate, like fingernails. I didn't check. Not yet. The scraping came again just before dawn. Not above, below. Something was down there. I lay in the dark with the lamp turned low and listened, holding my breath so the sound wouldn't be drowned by my own heartbeat. It wasn't metal grinding. It wasn't rope or debris caught in the rudder. I knew those sounds. This was something else. Softer, like wet skin brushing against wood. Or fingers. I sat up and waited, unsure whether to go above or stay hidden in the cabin. I had no weapons other than a rusted knife and a flare gun. And honestly, I didn't know if either would be useful against whatever was out there. The sea had returned to its unnatural calm. The water around the boat was glassy again. The surface, so still it looked like you could walk across it. Not a whisper of wind, not even a bird's cry. Just a silence, so complete it pressing on my eardrums like deep pressure. I needed to know. I crept above deck, barefoot, careful not to let the boards creak. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was starting to lighten with that pale gray blue that comes just before dawn. I made my way to the stern and leaned over the rail. At first, I saw nothing, just a dark green water, dense and glassy. But then, something moved below the surface. Not a fish, not a shark, not even something I could describe in biological terms. It was a shadow, long, undulating, slow. It circled the boat at a distance of maybe 10 feet, just deep enough that I couldn't make out its full shape. And it was huge, bigger than the cutter by far. It didn't swim like any marine animal I'd seen. It didn't dart or glide. It drifted, and it watched. I couldn't explain how I knew that. I just felt it, like when you catch someone staring at you from across a crowded room, a prickling at the back of the neck, an instinct you can't argue with. It was looking up, right at me. I stumbled back, heart racing, and fell hard on the deck. My arm hit a cleat and split open just above the elbow, but I barely felt it. I was too busy trying not to scream. By the time I looked again, the shadow was gone. The water remained calm. I bandaged a cut with one of my cleaning rags and retreated below deck, trying to process what I'd seen, trying and failing to convince myself that it had been a hallucination, a trick of the light, a waking dream. But the scrape was real. The blood was real. And worst of all, the boat was no longer pointed southeast. The compass had shifted. We were heading west again. I checked the rudder. Still locked, still pinned. Something else was steering me. In desperation, I powered up the small radio I'd kept off since the voyage began. I was told not to use it unless there was a life-threatening emergency. I figured this qualified. I scanned the channels, switching from emergency bands to open ones back and forth, trying to catch anything. A weather report, a ship's ID, a fishing trawler. Nothing. But after several minutes, just as I was about to give up, I caught something strange on channel 16, a faint transmission. Hello? Hello? Is anyone? Static swallowed the voice before it could finish. I sat forward, twisting the dial, speaking into the mic. This is Vessel Sparrow. Cutter class. Lone operator. Requesting contact. Do you copy? Silence. Then, you have to turn back. The voice was weak, female, distorted by the crackling signal. I grabbed the mic again. Who is this? Identify yourself. Static again. A long pause. Then the voice returned, clearer, more urgent. It doesn't want you to leave. It remembers what you did. My blood turned cold. I dropped the mic. What I did, it couldn't mean no. That voice couldn't know. No one out here could know. Not unless someone else had been watching. Unless this punishment, this so-called atonement voyage, was never about isolation. Maybe it was surveillance, a trap, or worse, a stage. But who would be watching? Who could reach this far out, where no radar touched and no signals reached? Unless it wasn't human. The radio went dead after that. No power, no static, nothing. The battery light blinked red, and then blacked out completely. It had been fully charged the day before. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay awake in the dim orange lamp glow, listening to the sea, not the waves. The sea itself. It had a rhythm now, a kind of slow pulse, almost like a heartbeat beneath the hull. I could feel it through the soles of my feet, like I was resting on something alive. I tried again to write, but the journal was missing, gone. In its place, on the desk, lay a single piece of torn canvas. My handwriting, scrawled in charcoal, but I hadn't written it. The sea remembers, but it does not forgive. The sea stopped breathing the next morning. It was the only way I could describe it. The pulse I had felt the night before, faint and deep, like a heartbeat reverberating through the hull, had vanished. The water stretched in all directions, flat and still as oil, the color of old bruises under a low, leaden sky. I stood at the bow with the wind dead against my skin, though there was no wind at all. And then I saw it, a line, just barely visible beneath the surface, like someone had drawn a perfect arc across the ocean floor in ink. At first I thought it was a natural formation, a trick of light or current. But as I turned the wheel and brought the ship around to follow it, I realized the truth. It was man-made. No, not man-made, constructed. Too precise, too straight. It disappeared into the murk at both ends. But I could see the faint outline of something embedded in the sand below. A ring of stone or metal maybe a mile wide. Mossy, ancient. I dropped anchor and pulled on the wet suit from the emergency locker. I hadn't planned to go diving out here. This part of the ocean wasn't supposed to be deep enough for it, but the water beneath me felt like it had no bottom. I could feel the pressure before I even hit the surface. Still, I needed to know what was under this boat. Something had led me here. I plunged in feet first, tethered by a line to the stern cleat and carrying the flashlight I'd sealed in a waterproof case. It wasn't until I was 20 feet down that I understood how wrong this place was. The water glowed, not from the light, but on its own, a faint green luminescence, drifting like mist. And with it came a sound, a vibration more than a noise, a low, resonant hum that buzzed in my jaw and skull. The circle came into full view at 30 feet. Massive stones, each engraved with symbols that didn't resemble any known language. They weren't decorative, either. They meant something. Deep, geometric shapes that looped and spiraled like mazes. In the center of the circle was a hole. I swear to God it looked like a mouth. Not a tunnel, not a cave, a mouth. Dark and wide and stretching so far into the abyss below that my flashlight couldn't find the bottom. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the water, through my bones. It felt alive. I hovered there, suspended above the hole. Tethered the boat by a thread I suddenly feared was too thin. Then something stirred in the dark below. At first it looked like sediment, swirling clouds of black and green. But then shapes emerged. Pale, long-fingered limbs. Too many of them. Twisting in slow, agonizing choreography. A face blinked up at me, if you could call a face. No eyes, just a slit where a mouth might be, and above it, carved into the forehead, a name, my name, etched into the flesh. I panicked, kicked hard, and shot upward, nearly tearing the tether as I surfaced, gasping, half screaming. The image of that thing burned into my mind. I clambered back aboard, stripped the suit off like it was burning me, and stumbled into the cabin. The journal was back, resting neatly on the desk. The page was open. You were given a year to atone. You've drifted instead. My hand shook. I slammed the book shut and shoved it in the locker. Every instinct screamed to get out of there, to turn the boat and sail for anywhere but here. But I couldn't move. I stood there, soaked and shivering, staring at the closed journal like it might open itself again. Then the compass began to spin, not slowly, wildly. The needle whipped in circles, faster and faster, until it shattered the glass cover. Shards skittered across the desk. Blood welled in my hand where a sliver caught me, but I barely noticed, because something was thumping against the hull again, not scraping, knocking, 4 times. Deliberate, heavy. I rushed up to the deck, flare gun in hand. Nothing on the surface. No debris, no wildlife, just a circle beneath the waves and that impossible silence. And then I saw the name again, carved into the mast. Fresh, my name, and beneath it, come below, remember. I staggered back, heart hammering. The flare gun slipped from my grip and clattered to the deck. I didn't pick it up. The hum returned, not from the sea this time, but from inside the ship, through the floorboards, through the walls. A low, pulsing chant I couldn't quite make out. The air grew thick, hot, and then a voice whispered in my ear. Clear, calm, close. You didn't think we'd forget, did you? I turned, but no one was there. Just me, and the sound of the anchor chain unspooling, on its own, dragging me, and the vessel, slowly but surely, back toward the circle. And that's just the beginning. One handprint, one voice, and a journal that writes back. The wake of ash is just getting started. And the deeper we drift, the darker it gets. Got thoughts or theories already? Drop them in the comments. We're watching them all. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming in part 2. Because trust me, the seer remembers. And if you want bonus content in a shorter form like Reels, please give us a follow on Instagram at StoryStream. Thanks for joining us. Stay afloat while you can.